We are very excited to host here today all four authors of the book Second Shift, The Inside Story of the Keep GM Movement. So a few words about the book first before I introduce you to the authors who have very kindly joined us today to take us through the book and to take your questions and answers for the second half of the session. So the book details the complexities of an automotive industry rapidly transforming due to external economic and market forces, a community reliant upon a local manufacturing facility scheduled to be added to a long list of plant shutdowns, a variety of factions and personalities at odds with the City of Lansing, and a mayor committed to persuading GM to reverse course on its decision. So a really great topic for us to discuss today, and we are delighted that the four authors of the book can join us. So I'm going to introduce you now to each of them. David Hollister. David. He was the mayor of Lansing here in Michigan from 1994 to 2003, and you'll hear a lot more about David's role as we go through the presentation. Ray Tadgerson. Ray. Former president and CEO of C2AE, a Michigan-based architectural and an engineering firm working closely with Mayor David Hollister on the Keep GM campaign for the Lansing and Greater Michigan community. And Ray served as the senior strategic and marketing advisor to Mayor David Hollister during his time. David Closs, David, correctly pronounced, yes. Professor McConnell Endowed Chair and Chairperson of the Department of Supply Chain Management in the Eli Broad College of Business at Michigan State University. And then Thomas Hult. Thomas? Professor Byington Endowed Chair and Director of the International Business Center in the Eli Broad College of Business at Michigan State University also. And then finally, Terry on the end here, executive producer of a company called Message Maker, who prepared the documentary on this great story. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Thomas. You're going to lead us through the details of the book, and then we'll be back in 30 minutes or so to take your questions and answers. Thank you.
Do we want everybody to sit like this? Yeah, go ahead. Yep. All right, we're going to do a little bit of David Closs in particular, but also myself. We're very big into supply chain management. Michigan State University is known for that. We're going to try to do some, play with some logistical challenges to weave together this story, if you will, for you. We're going to try to do it pretty rapidly, including a couple of clips, but logistics comes in because I'm going to hand the mic back and forth to the co-authors as well on different segment topics. So hopefully that becomes engaging, and hopefully we stop talking soon enough so that you guys can engage us with questions as well. So Second Shift, you see the book cover. There's a documentary film that Terry and his team at Message Makers put together as well. There's a 55-minute documentary. It's been shown on PBS Detroit. It will be shown nationwide, we think, this fall or soon thereafter. So there's a little bit of a branding package there to talk about this particular story. So Mayor Hollister came into office in 1994, if I remember it correctly, and this story started in 1996, and then we take it from there, actually up till last month, if you will, because the GM part of the world is very fascinating. So book cover, to go back to that, is just a little bit of the scenery in Lansing. We don't play it off much, but it's the scenery and the landscape a little bit. City line in Lansing. So the story goes back to something to the tune of there's 78 General Motors assembly plants worldwide right now. There are 18 assembly plants in the United States. And interestingly, we have 2 of them in Lansing. We've had a car manufacturer in there since technically 1897 with the Olds Motor Works, really started production in 1901. But then we kind of reopened that with Ray Tadgerson's help and others in 2001. The old plant became kind of a newer plant, the newest at the time, and then Delta Assembly became the second one that opened in Lansing in 2006. So it's been going on forever and ever. So the Keep GM campaign had lots of, obviously with the mayor and others, lots of political connotations to it. That did the community want GM in Lansing, or did it matter that we lost those number of employees or other things? And the storyline is pretty powerful. And I don't know, we can look at a lot of different numbers, but the numbers we like looking at are there are roughly 7,000 GM employees at the two plants, a little bit short of that at the two plants in Lansing. There's a 10-to-1 multiplier effect, meaning that for every one General Motors employee in Lansing, there are 20,000 more employees in the Tri-County area around where we are that serve Lansing, and there are another 50,000 employees at other companies. So there's 70,000 people at different companies that support the two plants in Lansing. So you got 70,000 of them, 7,000 of GM employees, and then it goes almost crazy from there. GM in Lansing has 2,700 Tier 1 suppliers and over 50,000 Tier 2 suppliers. Gets a little bit technical in the terminology, but there's a lot of infrastructure that depend on this particular setup that Mayor Hollister was able to frankly save for Lansing, and obviously we have other communities in Michigan that we can talk about if we can talk about what it meant not to have these plants there. So lots of numbers, lots of fun stories, and hopefully we can get into it. So the mayor was elected in 1993, came into office on January 1st. That's a weird date to start, Mayor, but January 1st of 1994. And 2 years after, he got this knock on the door, and he'll explain that a little bit. We're going to let them dwell on it after I sort of set up the stage for where we're going with this storyline. But that's his lovely wife, Chris, as well, and they're happy and smiley. And little did he know that 2 years later, we're just going to trash our community, basically. That was the knock on the door he got. And GM, not only did they say that they were going to leave, there was some good stuff there, too, and we'll get into that, too. But not only were they going to leave, the mayor wasn't allowed to tell anybody publicly anywhere. That was kind of what GM walked into his office with, literally. All right, so he's sitting here contemplating what happens, and Ed Donovan is the knock on the door. We actually talk about it and put it in quotes here as well. And that happened very early. Now, Mayor Hollister had been in the legislature for 20-some years and worked in politics for a lot of years, and even after he was mayor, he worked back in Governor Granholm's regime, if you will, in Michigan. But this is a pretty big task to take on when you have lots of different parties. 40, to the tune of 40, signed on to actually partner with the mayor in this particular case. We have a couple of clips. This is a clip. Terry's team at Message Makers were the producers again of the documentary, and this is the trailer that they produced as well, and it sort of captures all of the things that I said and sets us up and scoping out where we're going with this. So let's take a little bit of a look.
This is always a General Motors town, always an automobile town.
Got elected in '93. Get a knock on my door one day from Vice President of General Motors, and he said, I got some good news and I got some bad news. We're going to be launching this 100-year birthday of Oldsmobile. But when this line of product ends, we don't have any new product for Lansing.
All of a sudden, thousands of manufacturing jobs were at risk. But where do you start?
There were people who said, you know, we're not willing to give everything to GM in order to keep them.
And they said publicly, well, if GM leaves us with no production, it's no big deal. We'll become a wine-drinking community like Ann Arbor instead of a beer-drinking community like we've always been.
Well, you know what? If nobody has a job, there's nobody there to buy the wine and the cheese. Manufacturing, they say, supports between 7 and 10 jobs within the community, so it means everything to this city.
The mayor's approach to it was, we need to take this public, not to fight with GM, but fight for GM.
My goal is for General Motors to build its new assembly plant right here in the heart of our city, and I commit to doing everything in my power to make that happen.
How do you get 2 new plants built when you have plants being closed around America?
So in this time span, they literally closed dozens and dozens of plants, and the key part of the story is that when GM at that particular time had announced a closure, they had never actually gone back on that decision. So it was a fantastic uphill battle that these guys faced. So back to the team, just to define us a little bit. So obviously Mayor Hollister was the lead in trying to figure out a team to keep GM. He enlisted immediately Ray Tadgerson, both as an architectural thing, but frankly to speak engineering with GM, because they didn't want to be spoken to in marketing terms. They wanted to be spoken to in engineering terms. So that was part of the strategy, I guess, as well. Terry and his team, Tom Leitz is pictured here as well. They're the producers again of the what we call the PBS documentary, but documentary that was shown on PBS at least in Detroit, and it looks like beyond that as well. And then the two of us are David Close, again on my left, your right, and myself are endowed chaired professors at Michigan State who have been entrenched in the auto community and supply chain management and all of these different things for years and years and years. In fact, David got his PhD from Michigan State, so really years and years and years. So we're very much entrenched and motivated to not only tell this story, but also capture the fact that General Motors not only provides a manufacturing platform for cars, they provide a manufacturing platform for a lot of different now high-tech and other things as well for our community. This goes back to the logo, Lansing Works Keep GM, and the idea was that even to this day, in January this year, I'll leave it nameless because we don't want to compete against other communities per se, but this year Lansing Economic Club had a senior VPN from GM, and he came in and frankly said again that the GM workforce is the best we have in the GM umbrella. You know, that 78 plants later around the world, we can start arguing, ranking that, but nevertheless coming in to tell 500 people that the GM Lansing workforce is fantastically highly qualified, that is playing off the Lansing Works. The Lansing Works is what the mayor struck in the late 90s as this saying just that, and it still resonates. Okay, so we have, before we're going to shoot it out to the three co-authors here, we have one animated 2-minute clip that presents the overview of not only the book itself for sure, but the 6-dimensional sort of framework for what Lansing used in a codified version. So these guys went through it, and David Close and I, together with Terry's team, sort of codified what the solution actually became that can be used by other communities around the world, certainly around the country. We know Rio de Janeiro, for example, is looking into using something like this right now for complex problem they're having, and that's kind of fascinating in and of itself. The book just came out a couple of weeks ago. So let's take a look at the animated clip, and that captures the storyline of the book.
When car-making giant General Motors decided to close its plant in Lansing, Michigan in 1996, one person, the city's newly elected mayor, stood up and said no. Initially, it was the cry of a man in the wilderness. Not once in its century-long history had GM reversed a decision to close a plant. But Mayor David Hollister quietly went to work building the Lansing Works Keep GM movement and succeeded in defying all the odds. Hollister's collaborative problem-solving approach, the second shift model, succeeded in bringing together state and regional politicians, economic developers, private sector firms, labor unions, educators, and residents of the region. The second shift model is a dynamic, collaborative management model that saved a U.S. manufacturing city. Hollister's coalition implemented a strategic, 6-dimensional framework to achieve the seemingly impossible: identifying, name the challenge and its impact; partnering, develop meaningful relationships; building, construct your strategy as you go; solving, engage in constant problem solving; celebrating, mark successful milestones; and persevering, adapt and endure. It is powerful, persuasive, and well organized. The Lansing Works Keep GM movement was a victory of people over bureaucracy, of a can-do attitude over cynicism. It's proof positive that when the public and private sectors work together as equal partners, both sides come away winners. One of the great business sagas of modern times, Second Shift provides a proven, practical design for problem solving that anyone can apply in any business or community, large or small.
So it's very easy to go back and, 330,000 words or 37 interviews or 807 pages of interview notes, if you will, to come up with that 6-dimensional framework if you're Professor Close and myself. It's a little bit tougher if you're Ray Tadgerson and David Hollister in 1996 to 2001 to actually figure out how to get all these players on board. And we have some historical documents in the book. For example, one is a document. There were 40 different, both senators from Michigan, lots of congressmen, and on and on and on characters signed on to work together. There were so many different competing interests. The new Delta Township plan, for example, is a competing township technically, but became a collaborator in this process and so on. So the collaboration is pretty unique, and we're hoping that other communities can learn from that, at least as a starting framework for where to go with it. And that's what they are again. So we got the identifying, we got partnering, we got building, solving, celebrating, persevering. There's 8 chapters in the book, 1 chapter for each of those, plus the introduction chapter that sets the context for where we are, as well as a little bit of all the different political and other issues that have to be talked about it and figure out, frankly, solved. And then the chapter 8 comes back to managerially talk about perhaps how to implement it and where to go with it. In the process, we have quotes from Senator this, President that, X, Y, and Z throughout the book and everywhere, weaving them together in a nice storyline, including 37, I believe, different challenges, as well as these 6 dimensions here filtered down to 33 different, I'm going to call them variables right now since I'm an academic, but these guys will dwell on them here in a minute. So let's look at those a little bit in the context of second shift. And I wasn't going to do this, but we'll call on Mayor Hollister right away on second shift, because I think I've been talking about this. Why did we call the book Second Shift, Mayor?
We wanted to take the opportunity to, when we did the launch of the Alero, which was a part of the 100-year celebration of the founding of Oldsmobile, and send a signal to General Motors in Detroit that we were so confident in our workforce that it was our strongest asset, that we would launch the project on the second shift. Traditionally, new shifts or new products are done on the first shift, where you have all the engineers and the managers and the executives and the senior UAW leadership. So the old foxes of the unions, and my dad included, had worked there 35 years. So Jim Zupka, the manager of the plant, and Art Baker, the local UAW guy, came to me and said, we want to send a signal, we're going to put it all on the table, we're going to launch it on the second shift and get their attention. So that's what we did. Now, we had to identify the problem because General Motors had just informed me that they're going to be having this wonderful week-long celebration, thousands of people coming, thousands of cars, it's going to be great, and we're going to launch this Alero in Lansing. This is all good news. But the bad news is when that production is over, that we have no product, that General Motors is not going to stay in the region. And that's kind of a sock in the stomach. And he also said, you can't tell anybody. So this is a private information. You can decide what you're going to do. Now, I'm a newly elected mayor. This is not great news. I can figure out how maybe I can get out of town and run for something else, or, forget this, give it to the chamber to figure out. But we decided to partner with Jim Zupka and the UAW and use that launch to do it. We had two tasks as we defined the problem. I mean, this falls under the category of identifying the problem.
I was just going to move on to identifying, which is your topic, Mayor, so we will keep the mayor going on identifying the problem. Tell us about that.
Well, when I became mayor, General Motors was the #1 company on the Fortune 500. My dad had worked for General Motors for 35 years. My father-in-law worked the same, 30-plus years. We took General Motors for granted. We thought you got the state government, you got Michigan State University, and you got GM, and that's the 3 pillars, and that provided a middle-class income, and it's going to go on forever. Little did we realize that below the surface, while General Motors was planning to launch the campaign on the 100th birthday, they were retrenching. And between 1990 and 2005, they actually closed 40 plants. And once they announced the closing, they never reversed themselves. So we were looking at the reality. We were being told, we're going to close your plants after 2005. These are the oldest plants. They were 100 years old. Some of the buildings had wood floors, so it was a fire hazard. And so you had the legacy costs and and you had a number of other factors going on. We had to educate General Motors about why they needed to stay, and we had to re-educate them about the value of our workforce, and we had to get our own act together. When I talked to Donovan, and he talked, Donovan was the GM vice president, he wanted to know who he would be working with in the region, how many different taxing units were there in the Tri-County area. And it turned out that I didn't know at the time, there were 130 taxing units, and General Motors wanted to deal with just one, with one. So we had to create a unified, regional, problem-solving strategy that could reverse a decision that's never been reversed by General Motors, and do that knowing that the economy was pretty shaky, and foreign competition was coming in. They were losing market share, and we were going to have to change all that.
Pass it over to Terry. He's going to have a...
So just concluding your statement about why it was called Second Shift, the Alero was launched on the second shift, and it was the most successful new product launch in GM's entire history. When Jim Zupkus told us that in the interview, we just said, that's got to be the title.
And the story, of course, is that nobody works on the second and third shift except for those turn. It's a necessity work shift, I guess, but that's a fantastic storytelling that the engineers and everybody else is home sleeping, and we still trusted this community to take care of that particular launch, which became incredibly successful. Developing meaningful relationships is the next story in the six-dimensional framework that we also call partnering. It's a little hard to see on the yellow one there, but developing meaningful partnerships. And I already alluded to this, and we're going to invoke Ray Tadgerson, because we had 40 incredibly high, lofty community members sign on to doing this stuff, where I'm not sure all 40 of them competed against each other before they signed this document, but it seemingly could have been that way, the way our friends tell the story. So there was a lot of competition, and they came to the same table at this particular point in time. Ray?
The mayor's vision for this campaign was to bring people together and make it a collaborative effort. Now, when you have competing townships who would love to have any new product line, any new plant, they're all looking out for their own self-interest, as they should be, because they're representing their constituents. Well, the mayor was representing the region, and that's the way he wanted to come across, is that this was a regional effort. So trying to get those 40 communities to get on board, plus the chamber, plus the city council, people were telling him, you're wasting your time. GM has never changed their mind about doing something like this. When they're going to close the plant, they're going to close the plant. So why are you wasting your time, wasting the city's money, wasting your energy, your efforts? You can put your time into something better. But the mayor had a vision. He wanted this to be a world-class city. And the anchor, one of the anchors to that would be General Motors, keeping them and trying to convince them to stay. So in doing so, he brought on all these different elements of the community, neighborhood people, the union folks, just about everybody you can think of somehow got on board. We started and launched the Blue Ribbon Committee, and we had 28 people there that were a part of the committee at the time. We eventually had 50 people on that committee, but that was too large. You couldn't make decisions. The discussions became like a free-for-all, and so we had to create what we called the quick response team. That was a team of about 6 folks who met weekly to try to make decisions on what was going to be said to the public, how much was going to be said to the public, where were we at in the status, what was our next challenge. Thomas alluded that there were over 35 major challenges, and I'm talking about major challenges, getting the legislature to change the laws to enable tax abatements and incentives to be used to retain a plant as opposed to trying to attract new jobs. Getting the chamber on board. They were convinced that they were going to lead this effort. That took weeks to get resolved. And getting the townships on board. They really didn't want to do this, but they felt like they had to because they needed to keep an eye on Dave. They didn't want him doing something that he shouldn't be doing. So these people all got on board. The city council, he actually had to change the council, get 3 new people on board. because there were 3 negatives. Then you heard the story about, well, we've become like Ann Arbor, wine drinking instead of beer drinking in Bowling Town.
We love our GM as well.
It depends on, well, Jason says otherwise, but you know. At any rate, partnering became a big part of this, and so the mayor asked me if I would do this. And when he first asked me, because we had a successful partnership before that in building the baseball stadium downtown Lansing. So when he asked me, Ray, can you do this? I said, sure, absolutely. We were going back from Toledo, so we had a 2-hour bus drive, and I'm thinking all the way back to Lansing, what did I just do? I don't have a clue as to how to do this. But then I put together a strategic plan for this and created all these different partnerships and all these subcommittees, and figured out if everybody did their job, we might have a shot. So
we're going to build plants in about 5 or 6 slides. We're going to build a couple of plants. That's a fantastic undertaking and achievement to get 40 of those. I know it's impossible to see, but if you look in the book, you're going to see all of those different titles and characters that I described. If we construct your strategy as you go, so the last thing on the planet anybody should do is construct your strategy as you go. You usually want a plan of some kind and then follow a roadmap, but we're frankly at Google, and the first place I can think of where you construct your strategy as you go is probably a company like this. So at least one company on the planet that may resonate what Mayor Hollister and Ray Tadgerson did. That's not the norm that General Motors would follow, for example, but that's the norm that had to be followed in this particular case. On the left-hand side there of the slide, you see a bunch of those variables, if you will, the under sub-dimensions of these things. We're not going to go into those, but they are described and talked about in the book and how they were used. Construct your strategy as you go. I'm going to invoke David Closs on that particular topic.
Thank you, Thomas. It was not a situation where you could develop a strategy and then execute it. It was far too dynamic than that. As you see some of the key points on the list that Thomas had on the previous slide, there's some on, you have a dynamic environment of what's the auto industry look like. It was clear the auto industry was changing from a situation where you had the people that came out of high school and the voc ed thing to a very high-tech development process, changing workforce. It was clear in this case we have a very big challenge in communicating to the environment. You had, as Dave Hollister talked about, the challenge of the internal group that you shared information with. You have the community who wasn't quite sure of what's going on here. You have General Motors who's saying we made a decision and we're going to move on. And then you have local people from General Motors who know the quality of the Lansing workforce. And so it's keeping those 4 things, those 4 balls in the air throughout the process. And that became a lot of the challenges as we read through the manuscripts and the interviews. It's like looking at those things and balancing them and doing the trade-offs. And just having a strategy in place and keeping that going was the key part, and that's one of the key lessons. I think one other point I want to make, and where Dave Hollister and I first started working together, is if you look at many communities trying to retain manufacturing environments, which is something I've worked on a lot, there is historically a lot of conflict, as Ray talked about. And how do I get them to realize that from a business point of view, a city's boundary or a county's boundary is irrelevant. It's how do I put together a region and get the workforce to make it work together. And that's not just a Lansing problem, although I think this story shows that we've did a lot to accomplish it, but it's other regions too, including Southeast Michigan.
That dynamic nature of problem solving is played up in what we call engaging constant problem solving as well. I mean, think about where you guys are right now. Self-driving cars is a totally different phenomenon from late 90s or 50 years ago or 1897 if you want to go really far back. And that's not the same mindset, same strategy, same person, same toolkit to actually get into that arena, even though seemingly for the average customer seems like it's a car. but it's a totally different dynamic, and I think these guys ran into that as well. Engaged in constant problem solving, we're going to recycle. We're going to go back to Mayor Hollister to talk about engaging in constant problem solving.
Well, I was confronted with this knowledge that General Motors was leaving. The Chamber of Commerce wanted to continue to take the lead on retention. That was one of their traditional roles. I didn't feel that was going to be adequate, and I had to think about any community could offer a tax break. I mean, all communities, all states have some kind of tax package. We wanted to go beyond that and create something very unique. So we created a single entry, single exit, one-stop shopping and problem-solving center. So we said to the community and to General Motors, if you have any problem that you want solved, you bring it to the mayor's office. That's the one-stop, single entry. And that if the mayor's office isn't identifying or justifying the data, then it's just a rumor. I mean, it's got to come directly from the mayor's office. So you got a single entry, single exit, one stop, and we asked General Motors to give us 30 days and any problem they wanted solved. Any problem, and we would tackle it and we would come up with a solution. We had a problem of odor on the west side of town, and we engaged the community to solve that. We got the health department involved, we got the neighborhood association involved. The environmental groups were out there, opposing us initially, saying that General Motors shouldn't be getting more capacity to build in Lansing because the air quality was not adequate. And so we had to figure out that strategy. We got the schools involved. We put an air monitoring and a weather monitoring equipment at the local high school football stadium, so they could get every day. They were getting data on air speed and temperature and humidity and all that stuff, and got the schools involved and the students involved, and then we got the engineers at General Motors to start tutoring in the schools. So we had to try to be very comprehensive in our strategy. General Motors, as we won the designation of the most successful launch ever, Mark Hogan indicated that he would consider Lansing for a plant. We originally told he wouldn't have any chance at all, but because we were so successful in this problem solving, that he gave us a shot at it, and so we had to deliver on that promise. But it was we brought to the table the township officials, the city officials, the state officials. The governor and I were at odds with each other in the legislature. I was a liberal Democrat. He was a conservative Republican. We fought like cats and dogs. But when we were both executives trying to save this industry, we decided to work together. So we put together a strategy and we delivered on it, and we solved virtually every problem. And one of the key ones was Ray looked at the internet, figured out how to build a plant on the downtown Lansing site and do it without disrupting the production and without taking a greenfield and turning it into a plant.
Actually, let's turn it over to Ray. Won't you tell the plant story a little bit?
Well, the plant story is kind of interesting because when Mark Hogan, the vice president for General Motors, said he was considering building a plant, they were building Cadillacs in Eisenach, Germany. And they wanted to stop that production and bring the Cadillacs back to the United States. They didn't say where, but they didn't say or when, but they were going to build a plant somewhere. Well, to really try to figure out what they wanted to do and why they wanted to do it, they had to build a business case here that says it would be cost effective to build it wherever they're going to build it. Well, fortunately for me, I was led to a set of plans that came from the plant manager at the time, Jim Zupkus. He pointed me to a set of photocopies of a plant that was built in Brazil. It had a code name Blue Macaw. This was very confidential information. He told me, you can't share this with anybody. You can't tell anybody where you got it from. I said, okay, can I tell the mayor? He goes, okay, there's 3 of us. And so I shared it with the mayor, but it took me a week to figure out, would that plant fit or not? Because it was in metric, and it was virtually indiscernible as to what was on that. So I had to create a new scale. It was a scale like 1 inch equals 167 meters. Something weird. You know, most scales are not like that. Well, I had to figure that out, and figured it out that this plant was built on 70 acres. There was 180 at the existing plant site, about half of which could be torn down. The buildings that were on there could be torn down. They were vacant, they were storage areas. So I said to Jim, if you tear those buildings down, this plant won't fit there. So Mark Hogan happened to be the vice president who oversaw the project in Brazil. And so when I showed him this plan and said, we can put this footprint on that plant site, he said, where did you get that? I said, research. And so we offered to take it back to Detroit with him, and he said that wasn't necessary. He would take it himself. And several months later, he said, we're going to build that plant.
So we went through the celebratory thing here of intermediate steps. Obviously, this is a long process, so part of the model includes celebrating as well as we go along. And then the last one is persevering, and that should go for obvious reason. But if you don't celebrate till the end, like we oftentimes do in this particular process, you don't get the community behind you or these 40 different people signing on and the organizations they represented. So the celebration became an immediate as well as a final step in that process. And clearly getting a 70-acre plant where they may have wanted a couple of hundred acres or really wanted 300 acres and on and on. And we're going to talk more about acreage here on the last final slide, I think. So moving on to persevering, that's adapt and endure in this particular context. And I'm going to invoke Professor Closs again on that topic.
Again, this is the whole process is a very dynamic environment, and we had to adapt as the educational structure changed, the workforce structure changed, and even the supply chain structure changed. We had to bring in suppliers and get them involved in the process. As we came to the step of a second plant, other issues came in terms of integrating that. So the overall process, the realization, I think, is that it's not you just create a plant and it's going to last a long time. The plant is changing day to day, and we had to switch that reality both for General Motors, and of course they realized that, but the community I don't think did. And some of the lessons that came out of the interviews were what we have to do with the community to make it realize that, and I think Dr. Simon at MSU made a very good quote on the back of the book where she said, we have to not take for granted what we've had here in the past and be able to adapt for it. And that's really one of the big lessons that came out of it.
And not to gloss over celebration too much, Jason, of course, invited us here, which is kind of cool. And I think this was about 2 years after Jason played basketball for Tom Izzo at Michigan State. We're guessing it was about 1998 season, give or take, that he dedicated, the whole team and their season was dedicated to keep General Motors in the community as a campaign, which is pretty cool. So a couple of years after that, I guess, but he missed the dedication to General Motors, Jason did, but he certainly won a national championship. That may have been a better deal of the two. For us, it was keeping GM and winning national championships. We won all of the above. 2 plants were built in that process. Ultimately, the outcome of this storyline is that there's a 2001 plant to build at the Grand River Assembly. The 70 acres that Ray Tadgerson was talking about, there were 180 or so acres available. That's a 100-year-old on top of each other type plant with nice drawings from Brazil. I mean, the storyline there is pretty deep and interesting if you dig into the book as well. And then Delta Township in 2006, that plant opened. So the Delta Township supervisor or mayor, I'm not sure exactly the title there, but anyway, the leader of Delta Township signed on almost immediately when Mayor Hollister said, can you help out Lansing and support our cause? And sure enough, 5 years later, which is really short time period, they get their own gigantic plant. The Delta Township plant produces a little over 1,100 cars a day right now. The Grand River Assembly produces about 700, and there are about 6,500 to be exact employees in town. And I guess the UAW leadership loves to tell the story about the last year. They've hired 1,000 new workers, and all of them actually became members of the union. So that's a storyline that those guys like telling as well. And our story, according to Mayor Hollister, may not stop there. This is the second to last slide, so that's why we want to poke on the community a little bit. So as recently as June of this year, Mayor Hollister went on record and saying that, General Motors owns 1,100 acres of farmland next to Delta Township, that plant. They only need anywhere from 70 to 300 acres, depending on what size plant they want to build. So they can build a lot more plants there. And I guess the quote on this one is, Mayor, GM isn't in the farming business, Hollister said. So 1,100 acres later, I guess there's hope in the community that means something for the future as well. And I know you guys are getting a fantastic deal if you want to. If you go it as a regular customer on Amazon or what have you, it's a $30 deal, but you guys get it for 15, and as it looks too, you may get it reimbursed as well. So it's a pretty cheap deal in the sense of having it on your bookshelf or store line. If I'd known Jason was on the team back then, I would have dug up a Tom Izzo's signature in the process as well. But Tom Izzo is, again, one of the testimonials on the back page or back cover, rather, of the book, plus a few other characters like senators and others. So thank you for indulging us. We will take Q&A as you see fit from any of the five of us, including Terry. Terry, of course, was instrumental in this Message Makers team to put this into a documentary. So that's in some way the surface level of the business model. That's a nice 55 minutes to look at. And this is the more codified version of the six-dimensional framework that we're hoping other communities can learn something from, at least as a starting point to solve similar problems in a complex format. Thanks, everyone.
My question is for Mayor Hollister. So it's day one. You're given this piece of news, and you don't want this to happen. Where do you start with a challenge this big, where GM has never before reversed this kind of decision?
You swallow hard. You put on a good face. You begin gathering as much information as you can to formulate a strategy, and then you articulate a plan and engage partners and begin the process of building trust, because without trust, this is not going to work. And this is going to be difficult because you've got a fragmented region, 3 counties, and they're all competitors, and there's no history of collaboration. So it was going to be important that we incrementally bring people along. And I made a commitment very early to the regional leaders. It must be a win-win situation. And this is critical to the other communities that are facing this. You bring your competitors to the table. So we invited the township leadership, to the table. We invited the chamber. The chamber in the campaign when I ran for mayor didn't even give me an interview. I mean, they endorsed my opponent without even giving me an interview because I've been such a liberal Democrat for 20 years. So I invited them to participate. I asked the chairman of the chamber to be the public face of the Blue Ribbon Committee. So you bring the diverse people together, you do a transparent process, you commit to win-win, and then you begin problem solving. And part of that was getting data. We went to the University of Michigan and asked George Fulton, who was a wizard and an expert in economic forecasting, and he had a metrics of measuring job impact by incentive packages and that. And George and his team were credible beyond if we had gone to Michigan State and got that data. People would say, well, it's a homer kind of a deal, they're just covering themselves. But by going to George Fulton and his national reputation, and he documented that this plant, this 100-year-old plant, was generating 2% of the wealth in Michigan. 2% of our GM, gross domestic product, was coming out of that 100-year-old plant. And that if we could replace the plant, we would have this much impact, and if we got 2, we'd get this. And we took that data then and began to educate the community about how important it was that General Motors stay. And then we developed a strategy to educate General Motors about the asset that labor represented, and that the community brought in our DNA, because we are a collaborative group, and it slows us down. We knew it was going to take time. This plays out over about a 7-year period. The Blue Ribbon Committee that we had actually functioned as a formal group for 5 or 6 years. But to answer your question, you just muddle ahead. I mean, we didn't have a great detailed plan, but I had been a legislator for 20 years. Probably the best training I had for the task was teaching high school dropouts. When I was a high school government teacher, prepared me well for working in the legislature, but it also prepared me well for working in this kind of environment. Because when I was in the legislature, I was the chairman of the welfare budget. So every year I took a beating trying to get this budget passed. And you're always putting together coalitions. You're always trying to get the budget passed. And this is the most political budget. So I chaired that for 16 years. So I had the experience of bringing people who don't like each other together and getting them to focus on a common goal. So that's what we did. It took time. But it paid off in spades.
So I have one more question before I open it to the group, and I think it's the privilege of having you physically here rather than reading the book. You know, we'll go through the process in the book and we can see all the challenges you came up against. But here we have the living, breathing embodiment of living and doing that day in, day out. So you're wasting your time. You have solved a challenge, another one gets thrown up. For all of you personally, you know, how did you continue to dig deep and find that passion to continue to problem solve? I mean, that's something we like to think we do at Google every day, but you have a really big world example of having done it and impacted so positively the lives of so many people. So it'd be nice to hear your personal experiences of how you dig deep and how you force yourself to go on to the next challenge.
Overdue, right?
I think my formal training was as an engineer. I got my master's, bachelor's and master's at Michigan State. I was a civil engineer. You know, civil engineers build roads, they build buildings, they get involved in all kinds of different projects. So this was totally out of character for me. I had never taken on a project like this. But the training that I had received during the course of my career and the course of my college education was problem solving. Engineers have to be problem solvers. You folks are problem solvers, and that's what that's about. It's like you have to rely on all of your experience and the folks that you have around you, and the ability to dig deep. It's dig deep. I learned that there was an equation for this. It's called 5 whys. Why do you do this, and why do you do that? And dig down, drill down, keep drilling down, and eventually you get to a solution. And that's what we did.
Let's move it to Terry, because I think Terry and Message Makers, all they do is being innovative and creative. So creative is sort of part of his business card, I think, and maybe a good story.
You know, our task here was, you know, to help tell this story. And really what I wanted to say is that, you know, you have a few people here, but I was not involved in the team that kept GM. I lived in the community, but our task was to retell that story. And Dave and Ray came to me and said, you know, people are moving, passing on, whatever, and we got to capture it. So we interviewed, 40, 50 people. They are in the documentary, they're in the book, and you get that perspective on it, not just ours, but theirs as well. And it's pretty fascinating, and I encourage you to look at it.
It was important to me, it's not winning or losing. The important thing is the integrity you bring to the process. And being transparent, being inclusive, being focused on win-win, those were important. You're going to have setbacks. You're going to have failures. You know, this was like an undaunting task. But and I had General Motors telling me not to do it, not to do it publicly. But if you create a process that is transparent and participatory and inclusive and focused on win-win, then you can take those setbacks. So that winning and losing are not the issue. The issue is the integrity of the process and the integrity you bring to the process.
So we as a book author team met pretty much weekly forever, it seems like, to put this into codified format. And transparency and trust were two words that these two guys brought up every single freaking week. That had to be the mantra for the storytelling. Not trust between us, that's fine, but transparency with the community in the late 1990s, telling them sort of what they needed to know, perhaps not every single detail, but the trust had to be built with the community and all these parties.
As my training is basically in supply chain, and I'm a Michigan native and spent the last 40 years of my life in Lansing. So I had a really passion for the whole thing. And I think what really got me interested in this is people were talking about, well, Michigan is not relevant because our labor costs are too high, or what other excuses we had in terms of that. And the fact, understanding supply chain, and the fact there are a lot of trade-offs. In this particular case, one of the key trade-offs is talent and labor. And getting people to understand that is not a transferable thing. You just can't pick it up and move it someplace else. One of the stories that came out of the book is a lot of the Lansing workforce are old farm boys. And I'm not saying that negatively, I'm saying it from the point of view, these are the people that make stuff work. And that's one of the differentiators in the plant, that they keep the plant working because they have that hands-on attitude. And telling that story was so very important to me.
I'll take it back.
Okay, I have a loud voice, that's why I was saying that. So you mentioned there was 40 other plants that were looking to shut down. Did you find any other communities or cities catch wind of what you were doing and you were public about it? Did they come to you guys to try and mimic what you were trying to do, and was anyone else successful?
In some interesting way, obviously, and I'm speaking for the two academics a little bit because we've been questioning. Part of the process is that we question these guys too. So every chapter has a reflections by Ray Tadgerson and reflections by the mayor, so that they get to tell their story in an I personality wording, if you will. But part of it was that General Motors knew everything that was going on, but they wanted to sign on to absolutely nothing. Because in some way, implicitly, I think, speaking on Professor Closs and myself's behalf, I think they were supportive, but they were never going to sign on to it. So that question that you're asking, if other communities would have gotten wind of it and General Motors had been even a little bit supportive, they would have used largely the same blueprint when 40 other plants were being shut down. And not that that became a competitive thing, but they were not going to say that this is the perfect model to keep us do this in the future. And I think Mayor Hollister had to work through that aspect of it as well.
President McPherson of Michigan State University took this model that we had developed, and as he organized Michigan State's strategy of attracting the facility for rare isotope beams. This was a federal initiative. It was a Department of Energy program. It was $800 million. The competitor was in Chicago and was in the district of President Obama. So we were taking on to win this competition, an uphill battle, and he brought together a statewide group of influential people. He brought some experts on board. We played to our strength. We engaged students, and he was successful in bringing this rare isotope facility to MSU. That was a model that it was directly patterned after what we did on a much larger scale. Other communities can adopt this, but we haven't seen many. Most documentaries, Ray and I looked at some documentaries, are of the closing and the kind of looking back at what went wrong. And, you know, Janesville, Wisconsin was one that recently was on public television. We wanted to tell a story that celebrated the fact that we won the battle, but also to document it and kind of memorialize it. And more importantly, to educate the millennials of what's the foundation upon which our current economy is built. Lansing is now much more diverse in its economy. It has a vibrant IT sector, 350 IT firms. It's second only to Hartford, Connecticut in insurance and finance headquarters. It is a high-tech companies that are spinning out of the cyclotron and the rare isotope beam effort. So we wanted these young people like your employment base to recognize that while the automobile industry represents the old economy, they also have been part of the transition to the new economy. And Lansing, we didn't know it at the time. We were struggling with how to transform from the old basic manufacturing with unskilled labor to the new economy with advanced manufacturing and highly skilled labor. In fact, one of the reasons we got the FRIB, the Facility for Rare Isotope Beams, is the highly skilled workforce that the UAW had that could take a building that they're building and design it and then modify it as they go through the process, because it's a 7 to 8 year process of building the building, and you've got skilled enough workers that can make the adjustments and modify the building as the science unfolds, because it's the same dynamic. So that's kind of a long answer to your question.
One of the things that, when we started this process, we had no idea where we're going to go or what we're going to do, solving on the run, so to speak. There was no manual out there that said, you know, go to page 27, you'll find out how to do this or that. So we had to create this as we went. But the success of what we did now, we've had communities call us and say, we'd like to, you know, kind of emulate your model. Can we do it over the phone? No, you really can't, you know. So Dave was asked to go to Janesville, and I was asked to go to Janesville, but they didn't want, you know, much from us. They thought we could handle it over the phone. So they tried a little bit of the model. They didn't use the whole model, and as a consequence, they failed. But they've reinvented themselves. I mean, I'm happy for them, because they've become a central area for medical now. They're between Milwaukee and Chicago, so they have attracted a significant business area there. At any rate, other communities have tried to do something similar, but most have failed. Now that we've put the model in writing, and thanks to David and Thomas, we were able to do that in a way that will make sense to other communities and make sense to students as they read this. So we're grateful for the opportunity. The last thing I want to add is that this effort ended up being a $3 billion plus investment in the Lansing region since we started this process. That doesn't include all the suppliers. So there is a huge, huge amount of investment here, and saving over 70,000 jobs in the state of Michigan.
Thank you all so much on behalf of the Google community here in Birmingham today, and the wider Google community that will hear your personal story online. And congratulations on the huge contribution that you've made to the community.
Thank you. Thank you.